Aloha, I'm Reverend Tim Lytle, Senior Minister here at Unity Church of Hawaii in Honolulu. And we are so grateful for all of you who watch us on our YouTube channel. We know with you that as you view these teachings and apply them to your lives, that it helps to build your life into the very best one that can be imagined. If you're ever in the area, please come and join us for a service, and please enjoy the message that you're about to watch. Aloha.
Oh, that was too fun. And that's the title of today's message, is Don't Worry, Be Happy. We are looking at the radical teachings of Jesus. And Jesus taught us, don't worry, be happy. Why are you upset? Why are you struggling? Why are you worried about this thing or that thing? Because God's got this, God's got this. Oh, but sometimes our ego gets in the way, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, I want to read a scripture that comes from Matthew chapter 6. And so Jesus is talking. Here is the bottom line. Do not worry about your life. Don't worry about what you will eat or what you will drink. Don't worry about how you clothe your body. Living is about more than merely eating, and the body is about more than dressing up. Look at the birds of the sky. And Jesus would frequently do this. Jesus would use nature and use lessons from nature to talk about spiritual principles. Look at the birds in the sky. They do not store food for winter. They don't plant gardens. They do not sow or reap. And yet they are always fed because your heavenly Father feeds them. And you are even more precious to Him than a beautiful bird. If He looks after them, of course He will look after you. Worrying does not do any good. Who here can claim to add even an hour to their life by worrying? Then we'll jump ahead to the end of the chapter. So do not worry about tomorrow. Let tomorrow worry about itself. Living faithfully is a large enough task for today. Living faithfully. So embracing the moment, embracing the present. Every moment is the best day of your life. Because every moment is the present. It's the present in which God resides. In Hebrew scriptures and Christian scriptures, one of the most used designations for the name of God is I am. I am. And as a child, I thought, what a strange name. I am. But later I began to get it. It's not I was. It's not like I used to be or I will be. It's I am. The eternal present, the eternal moment of now is where God is and where God always is. And so when we are tempted to go into the past and ruminate about the past, and do you sometimes think about things in the past and get stirred up? No, some of you don't. Some of you do not get stirred up. If somebody does something that felt hurtful, some of you do not ruminate about it and think about it. But how many people here, be honest, we're going to have a group confession. Now, I don't know if you came from a tradition where confession was part of that tradition, but we're going to have a group confession. So how many of you here sometimes, once in a while, think about how someone treated you in the past and you start to obsess and ruminate about it? Would you raise your hand? Wow. Okay, thank you. I don't know if the first service was asleep or if they're just superior, but I couldn't get as many hands. Thank you. Because it feels better to not be so alone up here, right? And then worrying about the future, worrying about what could happen, worrying about things that could happen. You know, I've wondered how many hours of my life have been spent or wasted worrying about the future. I mean, hours and hours, and I look back on it and it's like, okay, what did that worry accomplish for me? And Jesus says in this statement, literally from the Greek, it's who can add a cubit. A cubit is from the elbow to the tip of the finger. Who can add a cubit to their life by worrying? The Voice translation that I read puts it into a little more modern vernacular. Who can add even 1 hour to their life by worry? In fact, worry may very well take hours away from our life. At least hours of really living, hours of really enjoying life, and it may actually shorten your actual lifespan. You know, worriers aren't as happy. Worriers aren't living in the present. And remember, the I am is in the present. So, the past, the future. Now let me talk a little bit about the ego. How many people here have an ego? I'm looking around. Some of you don't have an ego. Interesting. How do you function? Because the ego helps us to know what to do, helps us to drive the car, helps us to not run into people. The ego is what helps us to navigate in life. Now, the adverse ego, and Charles Fillmore makes this distinction. Charles Fillmore is the co-founder of the Unity movement. He and his wife Myrtle founded this movement. They didn't see the ego as bad, but they saw it as something that needed, if you will, to be redeemed. Something that needed to be put in its proper order. So I would say that the ego should not be driving the car. I didn't tell my wife about this, and I can't believe that I'm going to say it now in front of her and everyone else. Because I thought, should I tell my wife this? Maybe it's better to tell her when all these people are here. So she won't do anything, huh? Maybe that's part of my plan. I have a wonderful young friend who is a devotee from the temple. Wonderful young man. I'm going to hear about this later. And so he needed to go to get his driver test. Joanne's shaking her head. You know him. Oh, yeah. Okay. We'll just keep it right here. Okay. And anyway, so he was so grateful. You know, he calls me Prabhuji. Prabhu means master. G is like an even additional title. It's like, but anyway, Prabhuji, I'm so grateful. Thank you for taking the time so we could go to Kapolei for the driving test. And so we had the second vehicle. My wife had concerns about taking the Toyota 4Runner. And retrospect, good idea. So what my friend said was, oh, okay, so I'll drive the car on the highway to Kapolei. And I thought, well, okay. You know, I'm thinking, you know, I'm sure he's had lots of driver's ed, and he's a very competent young man, and all that. And Azim, if you're watching, I love you. So we pull on to H1. He doesn't know how to merge. The lanes are full, but that did not stop him from pulling into them. I'm like, and suddenly my life flashed before my eyes. And I was thinking, what am I talking about this Sunday? Don't worry. Be happy. And I'm thinking, I don't want my wife to be a widow. And, eventually I realized, he's such a good guy, and he's wanting to learn to drive. And I said, you've had driver's education, right? He's like, no. Sometimes some of the devotees will just let me drive their car. I'm like, oh. Anyway, my humble obeisances sometimes events in our life can cause us to worry. I frankly wondered if that would be my last day with you. If it would be my last day here on this planet. Sometimes things stir us up in life. Bills, the rent, jobs or lack thereof, how people are treating us, what other people's opinions of us are. Isn't it strange that someone can think something negative about us when we know we're wonderful? It's like if they only really knew me, they'd know how wonderful I am. But people have all kinds of opinions. So who you are is not governed by what other people's opinions of you are. Who you are is the presence of God, because we know in unity, and this is our first principle, that there's truly only one power and one presence active as my life and as the universe, God, the good omnipotence. And since there's only one power, that means it's not possible for there to be anything or anyone against me. It's not possible. So when I slip into that error, when I slip into that illusion, it's because I'm slipping into that idea of separation. That somehow I am separate from my good. That somehow I am separate from God. Now the ego, again, doesn't need to be the driver of the car. Just as my friend. But with some help, could learn how to. The ego is there to help us, but doesn't need to be driving our lives. Doesn't need to be in charge of everything in our lives. Doesn't have to demand that everybody conform to what I believe to be right. Speaking about myself, all of us. That's the temptation of the ego. So sometimes the acronym for ego, EGO, is edging God out. Now it's useful. It's useful. It's a useful tool for us to have, But it doesn't need to be driving the car. And the adverse ego can get into fear. In our brain, there's this little area. Is the amygdala about the size of a walnut, Thomas? About the size of a walnut. Although studies have been done with transcendental meditation that show that the amygdala can actually shrink with meditation. Whereas the greater cortex can expand. Anyway, as in metaphysics, so in the physical, We can shrink that fear if we stay in the moment. The amygdala is that area of our brain that is fight or flight. As a person growing up, I was more on the fight side. You know? So I've had to do a lot of work with that. Maybe you can relate. And what that is trying to do is protect us from a perceived harm, protect us from something we perceive as being wrong. Fear, the acronym for fear, F-E-A-R, is false evidence appearing real. Fear is actually the opposite of love, not hate. Fear is this whole notion that there's something against me, or that I am somehow separate, or I am somehow divided. But when we know our oneness, when we know the presence, as Jesus was teaching, the birds are taken care of. They didn't apply. You know, they didn't have to go through an application process. They didn't have to get in line for bird supply. They are taken care of. And Jesus is saying, if God takes care of the birds of the sky, don't you know that God is going to take care of you? Don't you know that God is with you at every moment? That God is as close to you as your very heartbeat, as close to you as your breath, as close to you as your thought and your consciousness. You cannot be divided from God. Therefore, you can never be divided or separated from your good. God, the universe, is conspiring on your behalf. The great conspirator, God, the universe, is conspiring on your behalf to bring about the highest and best in your life. God doesn't want you to be mediocre. God doesn't want you to fade into the woodwork. God doesn't want you to be defeated. You are here to express God, to be the presence of God. You are here to let your light shine. In Matthew chapter 5, we have 8 beatitudes. Beatitudes. Attitudes of being. And those attitudes could be summed up in that whole phrase of don't worry, be happy, because we know God is present. Because we know wherever we are, God is. So it's time for a new attitude.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Take on a new attitude. We don't have to worry about the ego. We don't have to worry about fear. Be focused in that present moment, in the presence of God, and have a new attitude. God bless you. Thank you.